The University of South Florida is our school, our home, where the Bulls live at the heart of it all. Contribute to USF traditions and leave your mark. Countless residential events and involvement opportunities challenge our residents to lead the greater community, to become global citizens. Achieve excellence in a living, learning community. Expand your horizons. With classes outside your front door or even down the hall, your success is well within reach. Opportunity awaits you. Experience the best place to live, the best place to work, and the best place to learn. Live the Bulls life.
During my time at USF, I discovered that learning happens far beyond the walls of the lecture hall.
Студенты из 145 стран мира считают USF своим домом.
Tình bạn mà bạn trau dồi suốt đời sẽ giúp bạn trở thành một nhà lãnh đạo chuyên nghiệp trong chuyên ngành mà bạn đã chọn.
Como miembro de nuestra comunidad, te celebraremos por ser quien eres.
একজন পথপ্রদর্শক hawar jonno ekhane shob rokomer upokaron pabe.
Chuo chetu ni jumuiya ya watu kutoka mataifa mbalimbali na wote tunajifunza kwa wenzetu.
As you get to know your neighbors, you'll discover that you have much more in common with them than you ever thought possible.
Our uniqueness makes us special. Our unity gives us strength. Join us on campus. Live the Bulls life.
There's extra support for everyone living on campus. One person you will meet right away is your resident assistant, or RA. RA stands for Resident Assistant. As the name suggests, this team member will assist you, the resident. They know where things are located, how to do things, and how to get free things. They know things you do not know. By talking with your RA, you will learn new things, important things. Your RA will be friendly and helpful. If they are not, they are an imposter and should be reported to a real RA immediately. Your RA is a special person who is here to help you live the Bulls life.
Good evening, everyone. This is Real Talk Live. I'm your host, Zach Hyder, Residence Life Coordinator with Beta Hall for the Housing and Residential Education Department at the beautiful University of South Florida in Tampa. Our motto, best place to live, best place to work, best place to learn. The Real Talk series provides a chance to learn and engage in dialogue around issues of social justice by creating a space to reflect and critically discuss personal and cultural lived experiences, both locally and globally. It is our goal to explore one's worldview through identity, cultural rules, life experience, and bias. This episode will focus on defining commonly used terms in today's political landscape, so no matter your worldview, the USF community can share in a common language when we engage in conversations about these topics. Remember that we are live for viewers on campus and around the world. So if you have a question, please type it in the comments and we'll do our best to answer it for you as time allows. It's time to meet tonight's guests. Welcome, Jerry Staples from the Office of Multicultural Affairs.
Hey, happy to be here.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Jerry Staples. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I serve as one of the assistant directors here on campus in the Office of Multicultural Affairs, also known as OMA.
And could you tell us a little bit about why defining these ambiguous terms are important to you?
Yeah, I think they're big concepts. They are sometimes uncomfortable and sticky concepts too. And so I think if we can take the moment to just have a quick breath and breathe and talk through what the terms mean, what they are, and why they matter to our lived experiences and our relationships, then that gives us a little less stressed about the whole situation. So I'm excited to have these conversations tonight and then with students about how to engage and interact in meaningful ways in the world around them.
Thank you. Also joining us this evening is Dr. Vonzell Agosto, a faculty member from the College of Education. Hey there, how are you tonight?
Fine, hello, Zach.
Could you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yes, I'm an associate professor in the College of Education. I'm in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies program, and my research focuses on K through 12 education, specifically anti-oppressive education, with regards to curriculum and pedagogy.
Thank you. And why does defining these ambiguous terms, why is it important for you?
I think understanding terms, concepts, constructs are important for people to sort of enter a conversation, but I think it's important to understand sort of the history of some of the concepts so that they understand they're walking into the conversation at a particular point in time and that that conversation is ongoing and those constructs or terms might change over time.
Thank you both for joining us tonight. The first term I really want to unpack is the term identity. And I'm wondering, Dr. Agosto, would you start us off tonight by sharing your definition for this term?
Yeah, so I think when I think of identity, I think of the I that you hear when you first say it. This sense of who I am, this sense of self, how a person understands who they are. And I think there are different ways that people use identity or identities, plural. And so some people talk about visible identity, so we can look at people and sort of expect them to identify or to see themselves in a particular way. And we could talk about non-visible identities, things we can't see, you know, with the naked eye. I think there are identities that we perceive other people to have that they may not own for themselves. But I think a general way just to enter the conversation is a sense of self that people have, or in plural, identities, the different ways that I understand myself to be and to be becoming. So they may change if you think of identities as shifting and non-static.
What about you, Jerry?
Yeah, I think about, you know, exactly what Dr. Agosto said. Like it's a complex combination of a lot of things that we are and who we want to be and who we want to show up in the world. For me, identity is, again, that who's showing up, right? So some of us might be mothers, or some of us might have identities as Black or as gay, or et cetera. So these are all different ways in which we show up in the world. And so for me, identity is the complex connection and interwovenness of all of our various identities and how we show up in the world. So we don't just show up as our race. We don't just show up as our gender. We don't just show up as our social economic status. They all show up together in order to create who we are.
Thank you. So in thinking about your role on campus in the Office of Multicultural Affairs, how does identity show up on this campus?
Yeah. So I think about diversity as who's showing up, who's in the room. So for our office, I'm thinking about our student body where, you know, close to 50% of our student population identify as a, you know, multiracial or a different race other than white. And so there's lots and lots of diversity here on campus. And that's just from our racial makeup. We're not even talking about our international populations. We have a large international student group here on campus, as well as gender and many of the other plethora of identities that we hold. So for me, USF is kind of a buffet of great diversity here on campus. And so our office is trying to help students meaningfully engage with those diversities. One, understanding who they are and who they want to be in the world. And then the second part is how does that relate to the people around me? So whether that be in my residence hall, in my classroom, at my work study, wherever it may be, how do my identities then interact with someone else?
Something that you touched on in your answer is diversity. And I'm wondering if you could both tease out a little bit about the relationship between identity and diversity. Like, how are those two terms connected?
So I'll just say a little bit first about diversity. When I think of diversity, I think of it in different ways. So people may talk about intellectual diversity or ideological diversity. So there are different ways: geographical diversity, institutional diversity. And so we don't always know what the other person means when we're talking about diversity. Some people may feel comfortable talking about diversity in one area, but not a different kind of diversity. So I think diversity is natural diversity, biological diversity, and there's also human diversity. And oftentimes when we're on the campus, we're talking about social diversity, human diversity. So how are people different? And one way to talk about that difference is identity. So what are the different identities that make us up? Who do we understand ourselves to be? or what kind of people are we trying to become? How are we trying to live out our lives? How are we trying to express ourselves? And that those differences make up the diversity of the social world.
Thank you. We actually have our first question of the evening coming to us, and our question is actually for you, Jerry. Could you explain a little bit more about what the Office of Multicultural Affairs is?
Yeah, so our Office of Multicultural Affairs is located in the Marshall Student Center, room 3300 and 3306. And so our office is here to celebrate all the diversity here on campus, whether it be based on race or nationality or gender expression, et cetera. So our office is one of the many places on campus where students can come and learn, explore who they are and who they want to be in the world, as well as getting that education about other folks. And so we do a lot of programming, particularly around different cultures. So we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month in the fall, as well as LGBTQ+ History Month in October, Black Heritage Month in February, as well as the International Festival during International Education Month, Women's History Month. So there are plenty of opportunities that we as an office try to offer to celebrate the rich diversity here on campus, as well as providing trainings like Safe Zone and Undocumented Wildlife to help educate students on those populations as well.
And what is Safe Zone and Undocumented Ally?
Yeah, so Safe Zone is a four-part training series to help educate folks on the LGBTQ+ population here on campus and in the world. And so we have different classes that you can take through our office to learn about the LGBTQ+ community, the needs, how to support them, how to be a good ally, et cetera. And then same for the Undocumented Ally, which is focused on supporting the experiences of undocumented students here on campus.
Thanks so much for that insight about OMA.
Just a little shameless plug.
So it sounds like there's a lot of work around diversity that happens in that space, but I was hoping that you could also give us insight about how diversity shows up maybe on the campus outside of that space.
Yeah. So I think where identity and diversity might differentiate is identity is very personal. It's like my identity, who I show up in the world as. Whereas when we think about diversity, we think about it from a communal lens. So who are we together? And so when we're talking about diversity, is our community have a multiple perspectives, multiple opinions, multiple voices being heard, or are we having more of a monolithic community where we all think the same way and believe the same way? So when I think about diversity, I think about how our individual identities relate then to each other as a whole and create our community.
So the University of South Florida is a fairly diverse campus, and I'm wondering specifically with you, Dr. Agosto, if your experience in the education system, how does diversity affect a classroom setting, having a diverse classroom setting?
All right. I work in the College of Education, and so primarily I work with teachers or administrators or teachers wanting to become administrators, and the population there tends to be the same makeup as you see in K through 12 schools, primarily women who are white, who are monolingual, who are heterosexual. And so that tends to be the classroom I see before me. So I don't see the diversity that we may see on campus. And so I think when we talk about what diversity looks like here on campus, we can think about the difference across the spaces, that there are pockets where it may be more monolithic, right, or more heterogeneous. In the College of Education, it's different in the way that I just explained. And so my population is not always diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, and linguistic ability, nationality. So that's sort of my experience. And when I walk out of the college, I get to see more of the richness of the diversity of the campus when I leave the College of Ed.
Thank you so much. Before we continue, we actually have a second question. We're really dedicated to making sure that as student questions come in, it's heard and discussed here on the channel. So if you're with your resident assistant at a watch party right now, please feel free to work with them to ask a question as a floor, or if you're watching home alone, still feel free to send our questions this way. Our second question is going back to the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and specifically, what are the opportunities to get involved like?
Yeah, so we welcome students to come and be a part of our office. We have various committees that we put together for students. So we have a committee for our Hispanic Heritage Month. We have a committee for our LGBTQ plus History Month that are made up of students themselves. And so those are some of the quickest ways to get involved in terms of leadership. But we are always looking for volunteers to help us with our programs as well. So we have different events throughout the semester that we'll need extra people to come help out with. And so you can volunteer and be active with us. And the third way is really simple. Just come by and hang out. We have lunch every day about the 12 o'clock hour, and feel free to come and hang out and get involved and ask questions. We have dialogues like this all the time. So those are some of the 3 easy ways to get involved in our office.
Awesome. Oh, we actually have a question more related to some of the content, and I'm going to read it off the iPad right now. So, what practical strategy to reconcile inherent divisions entailed by multiculturalism with the need to accommodate different backgrounds is our question. So what I'm hearing with this question is, how do we acknowledge a person as a person? You're more than just maybe your most salient identity, but also acknowledge that the world treats you a little bit differently.
Heavy question.
We're starting off real hard, all right.
That's good. It's a balancing act. And I think no matter who you're trying to learn more about or what identity you're trying to learn or engage with more, is just being open to the storytelling. One of the things I tell people as we do diversity work and inclusion work is that storytelling is one of our most powerful tools we have in creating a just and fair and inclusive society. So if you're meeting someone who has a different background, a different identity from you, ask them about who they are and who they want to be in the world. And you might hear about how they have a dog and they love their dog. You might also hear about how, as a Black person, they are, troubled by some of the things that they're seeing in the world. And so being open to hear the whole story that they present to you without trying to rebut or without trying to interject your own story, and then allow that to be reciprocated for you. So that's the balance for me in terms of how do you balance, an individual without tokenizing them, but also supporting and saying, I'm an ally and I want to help support you. So listening is really the best way to do that, in my words.
Yeah, I think part of what people try to understand and to sort of create this sense of who they are is how they're different or distinct from someone else. And so they may pay more attention to the differences. So I think, and that's sort of a natural thing that people do, but I think the issue comes up, the tension comes up, is when we think about those differences in a negative or positive way, or we attach value to them. And so instead of just learning, as Jerry described, so I'm just trying to understand what it is, that people may rush to judgment, or they may think, oh, I don't think that way, or that doesn't make sense to me, therefore it's a lesser way of thinking or being. And so I think that's the difficulty. How do we encounter something that we may have grown up thinking that is just wrong, right? Or it's just morally wrong. But how do we sort of pull that back, sort of reserve that rush to judgment, to suspend that? And I think that's, in a way, I'm giving advice, but I'm not exactly telling how to do it, other than sort of you have to remind yourself and recognize when that is happening to you, when what I'm hearing, right, is causing some reaction to me that makes me almost want to sort of reject that, but go with my curiosity to understand. So that what I'm hearing is not just about me trying to define myself, but it's about me trying to understand sort of the bigger picture of the world and the different ways that people think and live in the world, make sense in the world.
Yeah. A follow-up question to those answers is, within the answer, we use the word intolerance, and I was wondering if we could, for our viewers at home, unpack what that means a little bit more. Yeah.
I think it is the active and sometimes the subtle devaluing of someone else and their experiences. So for whatever reason, I might believe a certain population is not as valuable as my own identity or valuable as another one. So I think intolerance, that kind of mindset, that valuing positively or negatively, gives us that freedom kind of mentally or emotionally to say, well, I can treat you lesser. Well, because I don't value you as much as XYZ, then I don't have to give you the same level of respect or intentionality or care. And that's where intolerance is actualized.
Do you have any thoughts to add, Dr. Agosto?
Yeah, I think what I hear more is tolerance, where people are trying to teach people to be more tolerant. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, sort of reserve your judgment, to give space for people to be and experience their lives. But it's not to give up your own sense of ethics, right? But if you're in a learning and trying to understand, to work through some differences, it might be the time for you to listen and learn and to practice being tolerant in a way. By that I mean reserving your evaluation of that person, reserving that judgment of that person, and not jumping to, especially going to where you're diminishing that other person.
And I'm imagining in a group or organizational setting where like that is happening, it's hard to feel like you're really a part of the group. It's hard to feel included in the group, which kind of brings me to another term that I wanted to unpack a little bit in this segment is inclusion. And how is that different than diversity?
Yeah, you want to answer that?
So coming from the College of Education, we typically talk about inclusion with regards to special education. So students who are eligible for supports and services who may have special needs. So I know that's not the way that people talk about inclusion outside of necessarily, but I think there's an overlap there. And typically inclusion, people talk about it as how do we have another group of people or individuals participate or integrate within some space or setting. So sometimes it's also like a placement, right? So here's a space that's not integrated, it's not diverse, and so we can be more inclusive by opening that space and allowing people to come in. But then it's not just about being in the space, it's also about participation, about membership. So for me, to be included means that you have the ability to express yourself, even if your view may be different than others. So it's how do you actually work and relate within that space? Are you seen on parallel, sort of equal terms as a human being that is accepted as offering something without even having to prove that just because you are? So it's not just about, for me, being in the space.
Thank you so much for that answer. It's actually time for us to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more Real Talk Live right after this.
So the Real Talk is a dialogical series that's focused on social justice, equity, inclusion, issues around power, privilege, and oppression. We are at the Political Power of Art. It was phenomenal. I think it was really powerful. Being able to share our own narratives, kind of understanding our own lives through social identity, whether we subscribe to it or not, but understanding how the world kind of sees us. Education, dialogical series, discussion, debates are all a part of what leads us to social change. Art can be healing, and it can be healing in a way that's really transformational. This is Choose a Better Word, and I'm representing housing and residential education. And we're doing this event to really empower residents and empower the community. It highlights language and how language can be hurtful, but also how we have a responsibility to kind of get through that and work through it and empower ourselves and others.
It's great to see so many students are willing to embrace what has been negatively said about them and then redefine that as what has been positively said about themselves, either by themselves or by the community around them. So it's been really great to see how that's been a spin on what could be a negative into the positive, which is the reality that these students live in.
So final reviews take place at the end of every fall and spring semester, the week before final exams. And we invite professors or faculty members to come to the Marshall Student Center and give a last exam review before their final exam. Students can interact with their professors, maybe they haven't gotten a chance to do so earlier on in the semester, or they can maybe see some things that they didn't know were going to be on the final exam, get some last minute help or even some insight as to what they can expect.
I'm Kimberly Fields and I teach organic chemistry in the chemistry department here. We take each chapter by about 15 minutes a block and we just power through the top topics in each chapter, and I sort of explain the highlights and why they're important one more time.
So for the stress of final exam week, I think there's a lot of different resources on campus. Pause and Relax, they brought dogs and llamas for students to come pet and play with to kind of relieve some of that anxiety or stress. I would say within the residence halls, a lot of the RAs will plan study events for their residents. So I think students should attend a final review session because any extra opportunity to help you practice for an exam is a good thing.
Ace those final exams.
Welcome back to Real Talk Live. I'm your host, Zach Hyder. Before we dive back into our program, we actually got some questions over the commercial break. One of them is about a program called Men in Residence. And the question is, why do men get the opportunity to receive a $250 scholarship for attending residence events and women do not have a similar program/opportunity? So while the Men in Residence program is specifically geared to address issues that men face on campus, we welcome women and anyone into those spaces to participate in those conversations because male issues do affect non-male bodied people. So therefore, if you want to come and participate in those events and be entered into the lottery scholarship drawing, feel free to do that. You will be able to connect with your RA to learn when those events are. Also, before we dive back into our program, we received a question about the Stonewall Llc, which is a live and learn community that is new to campus. And I thought that our guest, Jerry, might be able to provide us a little bit of context about it because the Office of Multicultural Affairs is a partner in this program.
Yes, so Stonewall Suites is a partnership between Housing and Residential Education and our office to create a space for learning as it relates to the LGBTQ+ community. So it's located in Beacon Hall this coming year, and it's our first year having the Stonewall Suites. And so it was created to commemorate the lived experiences of Stonewall, which happened back in the 1960s at a New York bar. And so it was named after that. And so it was all about LGBTQ+ people standing up, fighting for their rights. It was really the catalyst for a lot of the LGBTQ right movements here in the United States for that. So that's why we named it Stonewall Suites. But it's not just for our LGBTQ+ students. So if you identify as an ally or you want to learn more about the community as well, there's still an opportunity for you to engage and be meaningful in that community as well. So Stonewall Suites is all about learning, growing, exploring as it relates to LGBTQ+ identities.
Thank you for that. So diving back into our program, before our commercial break, we defined identity, diversity, and inclusion with our guests, Jerry and Dr. Agosto. Our conversation so far has me thinking about how communities and organizations may strive to be inclusive, but sometimes diverse identities are not treated equally across the board. So I wanted to dive in about why that happens. Jerry, do you have any perspective on why that might happen?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we've been talking about earlier. Is we as a society or as a community, for one reason or another, have labeled one identity or one experience as more valuable or less valuable than another. And so I think it happens by chance based on the community in, do you have the privileged identity or do you have the marginalized identity? And so our ability to engage in that is kind of the source for that, although it's also kind of difficult for me. I believe that society and media and home life and nature and nurture really kind of influence how we value that and how we engage in the world. And so it's hard to sometimes to say, well, are we more of a racist society because our media is more racist, or because we're more racist as a society, is our media now more racist? And so I think there's a tension, there's a cycle for me in terms of why oppression or why indifference or intolerance is perpetuated in our communities.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think people, if they want to be more inclusive, they will invite people in or open the space, but not necessarily know then what to do after that. Thinking that if we just have people here, they will do well, they'll fend for themselves, they'll figure it out. But I think what we're hearing also from Jerry, for instance, university has programming. There's a deliberate effort to try to understand and create spaces where you can have the dialogues. This program, like is one example. So I think figuring out what to do now that people have, are in the space, and that the space doesn't necessarily shift to be more accommodating. The policies, the practices, the culture of the organization may still be the same. And so it's not really shifting in a way that allows you to express your difference and be accepted for what you bring into that space. So how do we not only invite people into this space, but allow the spaces to shift because they are now in that space and helping the community to change and grow?
So I'm almost hearing it's not just a one-on-one type of situation, but it's a a system around an individual that is where they experience those things.
Yeah, often, especially like in schools and universities, there's a deep culture. Those things are in place, they've been in place, and so it's an ongoing sort of battle to work against some of the cultural norms that are there. And sometimes the institution, not intentionally, but has different policies or practices that create a social or cultural environment that is not really conducive to having different groups with different value systems and worldviews be included. And we don't necessarily recognize it because it's sort of deeper level of the culture, not the things that are visible and we can see.
We actually have a question from the audience, and it was, can you define oppression? And I wanted to ask you at this point, after we cut from commercial, because I feel like we started talking a little bit about something that's called systematic oppression, and I was wondering if we could tease out both of those terms a little bit.
So I think of one person that helps me think about and sort of define oppression is this person. She's no longer alive, but her name was Iris Marion Young, and she wrote about social oppression. And so it's not a feeling like people think associated with depression. Mm-hmm. So do you feel oppressed? I'm not talking about depression or this feeling that one has, but thinking about it more structurally. So how is society structured in terms of relationships, power, hierarchies, and how are institutions created as a response to people creating institutions that make this sort of larger system. And so we talk about structural oppression. And the way that she talks about it, she calls it 5 faces, and I might not remember all the faces, but I know one is this sense of powerlessness. So when social groups, right, don't have the same ability to influence or shape the world according to their norms, values, and wants and needs. So in addition to powerlessness, there's cultural imperialism. So this idea that there are ways to dominate groups by sort of wiping out their cultures and giving other cultural ways of being, forcing that upon people, or like even if it's through assimilation, you just have to sort of conform to the larger cultural environment. She talks about exploitation as another phase. So when groups are exploited, they're not getting the benefits or being paid for their contributions, they're being taken advantage of in some ways. That's another one. So there are probably 2 more. I don't think I need to go through them all. Not that I don't know if I can remember them, but I think that's a good way to think about what are the conditions that groups of people are experiencing so that they're not able to express themselves, or they're not able to make decisions that affect their pathways in life. And then we can start to think about what groups are socially oppressed.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really great explanation. I think a way to kind of maybe think about it in a different way is the values in action. So we talked a lot about like how we value something one way or another. And so for me, oppression is the actionable items of how I value something or how I disvalue something. And so I think it plays out if, okay, I think this particular group of people, I have ascribed that they are less than or they're not as good as myself or something else. And so maybe I don't invite them to, a social outing that I have, or maybe I don't invite them to interview with me, or, those kinds of things. So it's the values that we have now actionized is how oppression manifests in a daily life for me.
And I would add to that, if we take that to a higher level in terms of people in power making decisions, very influential people, making decisions that shape what's happening for larger groups. So then we get to talk about institutional structures and power at that level, not just how am I treating Jerry, right, at the individual level, but who is making these decisions, right, at this level that are going to affect people on a larger scale. And like I said, not necessarily intentionally, but if we have a policy that says we do X, and it may seem on the surface to be very productive, right, positive in all regards, but you have to look at the outcomes. So, and sometimes you don't see them, but if you're thinking about oppression and ending, intervening in social oppression, you have to look at the outcomes. So even I might have done something that says, this looks very good and feels very good to many different people, and I don't see any negative outcomes. But then after some time, I look and I see there's a disparate impact. I see groups are not benefiting or they're being harmed. And so even though I thought that policy was a good thing, I'm seeing down the line, it's not. It's actually creating these other problems that I didn't anticipate. So I never intended it, but and I say I as an individual person, I don't mean just me. I mean people usually in the collective making these decisions, like even at the university, when we make policy decisions, it's not just like one person doing that. It's a collective of people who may not be doing anything to harm anyone, but you don't know how that policy is going to impact groups of people unless you follow it through and watch for the outcomes.
So I'm always hearing in both of your answers that power drives oppression, that you have to have power to be able to drive that oppression. And moving on in our conversation, what is the relationship to bias in all of this? And like, what is bias?
Yeah, I think it's that systemic kind of approach that we're talking about oppression. So it's not just me, and it's not just singularly in a one moment or one environment, but it's a consistent maybe mindset or approach to the world. So for me, bias is consistently attributing a negative thought or a defaming thought towards a group of people for whatever reason, whether that is based on what your home life taught you or you saw on media, et cetera. So bias is that perception, that judgment call that Dr. Agosto was talking about in a negative way prior to meaningful reactions, and even sometimes after some of our interactions with the people across difference. So that would be my thought.
Yeah, so when I think of bias, I think of preferences that people have. They could be biased toward something or biased against something. And sometimes people think, oh, that's a bias towards something, that's a positive thing, it's good. But it may not be. So I think of like when people have stereotypes that are saying that those are the good people and they do good things, right? It's still a stereotype. It's a recurring story that's very sort of unchanging and linear about a large group of people. So it may sound positive to someone, but stereotypes are by the nature of what a stereotype is. So I think people have biases and you can't get rid of them. And I don't think that's, realistic to think you can rid yourself of all biases. I think you have to acknowledge them, to recognize them, and to be able to say, I realize my biases and the ones that may be able to cause harm to other people, the ones that are, that are operating when I'm making decisions or when I'm engaging with people. They're just beneath the surface, but I know that they're there. And what comes out of my mouth may even sound very logical. Like I've adopted this through and I have really good reason to do this or think this and make that decision. But underneath there's a bias that I may not have sort of brought it to the conscious. So we talk about unconscious, right, bias that we don't necessarily know, but it works through us and operates through us. Now at the individual level, right, that can affect sort of individual people depending on your level of influence, right, your position, your status, et cetera. But on a larger scale, we talk about, more structurally, like bias in the media. So we're talking about the media. We're talking about large scale types of bias. So what does it mean that the media, for instance, or education, or large systems, or the university portrays groups of people in particular ways, that they show a bias toward groups of students? So then we're getting at the structural beyond just the bias that an individual holds, but how those biases become a collective bias that then shape institutions, shapes the culture.
I think it's really also important as we're having this conversation to realize that everyone has biases. And a lot of times that's rooted in not knowing something or unfamiliar territory. And so I think we as humans try to piece together the puzzle of our lives, and similar things or similar experiences, we try to gain or a better understanding of the unknown based on what we've already experienced. And so for me, everyone has a level of bias, right? So me being a Southerner, I might have a bias against people from the New England area or from California because I've never really lived in that area. And so we all carry it. It's a matter of how do we interject and not allow our biases to get carried away or to cause irreparable harm to other people in our community.
Thank you so much, Bo, for those thoughts. It's time for our next commercial break, but we want you to stick around because we'll be right back with more Real Talk Live after this.
Enrich your experience in a living, learning community. Become tomorrow's business leader. Explore a myriad of career opportunities in education. Get in-hall academic support so you can excel. The place to live for high-achieving students. Achieve success through peer support. Maintain your competitive edge. Explore a broad range of career opportunities. Connect with other STEM majors. Immerse yourself in the field of advertising. Use ASL in daily life. Be truly green with other like-minded bulls. Prepare for a commission in the U.S. Armed Forces. Welcoming all LGBTQ+ and allied students. Share in the residential experience with other SSS students. Apply in the housing portal on our website and prepare to live the Bull's life.
This fall, USF Housing is opening the Stonewall Suites Living Learning Community. This LLC will be a place where LGBTQ+ and ally students can find and create an environment and community of awareness, respect, and advocacy for all sexual orientations and gender identities. There are no degree or GPA requirements for this community, and both first-year and returning students can apply.
By living in this LLC, you will gain an understanding of LGBTQ+ identities and identity development, learn about opportunities available to you at USF and in the greater Tampa Bay area, and receive information and resources regarding academic support and career readiness.
You will also be engaged in activities organized by Housing and Residential Education, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and the Department of Women's and Gender Studies.
There are even more benefits for residents of the Stonewall Suites LLC.
Peer support among individuals who understand what LGBTQ+ students experience on college campuses.
Share and encourage leadership opportunities such as joining LGBTQ+ student organizations and submitting conference proposals.
Greater opportunity for academic success by sharing resources available to students both on and off campus.
Receive information about scholarships and awards.
Connect and engage frequently with LGBTQ+ and allied students, staff, and faculty right in the residence hall.
This is the space where bulls can be who they are, be bold, be free, and be loved. Stonewall opened the door for gay rights. Stonewall Suites is the living room. This is our home.
Welcome back to Real Talk Live. I'm your host, Zach Hyder. Tonight, Jerry Staples, Dr. Agosto, and I have been working to help define ambiguous and often loaded terms that USF students are likely to encounter during their time at USF. Before the break, I think we've made some progress defining these concepts, and I want to explore a bit more about how they work. Two terms that I see come up a lot in conversation with college students is power and privilege. And I'm wondering if we can maybe start with, we've talked a little bit about power, start by defining privilege this session.
Yes, I would say privilege is really, again, thinking about the values and how we relate to one another. So the privilege is like the next step when we think about bias and oppression and that those kinds of things that we've already talked through. So for me, privilege is, okay, so now society as a whole has deemed one of my identities as more valuable than another identity. That one I can think of clearly, I'm identified as a man, and so in our society, unfortunately, we have valued men and our experiences more than we have valued our other gender identity experiences, like our trans friends or women, et cetera. And so now I have a level of access. And so privilege is all about access and opportunity and the ease of that access and opportunity. So even though we might have, you know, an opportunity to go to college or to get an internship, often because of my privileged identity, I might have an easier access to that. And so I might have a better chance at getting a job, or I might get a better opportunity to network with people, and people will see my identity and how I show up in the world one way as a man versus someone of a different gender identity. So privilege is about how we have access to things, whether it was given because we can grew up in a certain area, or things that we can't control based on, you know, how we were born into the world.
I'm almost hearing that, like, it's important not to feel negatively about having privilege because you have no control over it. There's nothing you did to feel guilty about.
So privilege is something that's unearned. I think a lot of times in our conversations about social justice and diversity, we think somehow I have gained this privilege or I have worked hard to have male privilege. And unfortunately, our society has already chosen a lot of those things for us. And so it's outside of our control. What is within our control is what we do with that privilege, right? And so for me, as again, using the example I use, as a man, I can advocate more for the voices of my colleagues that are women or my colleagues that identify as trans, and I'm giving them space. So not that I hoard the power, I hoard the access, I now try to work strategically in order to help support people with other identities that are not as privileged as I am.
Do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Important term that you added, Jerry, was the idea of unearned privilege. So I remember talking to groups of students about privilege, and at the end, it wasn't just me, actually, other people were talking to them, but at the end they all left the room thinking that they were privileged and they were just sort of celebrating their privilege. I have privilege, I have privilege, and I think of like when I was growing up and my grandmother would say things about privilege, you're privileged to do this, or we're privileged to be in this space, I might say, to be able to have this conversation in a way that we're not fearing for our lives and we can talk about it. But this idea of unearned privilege, to me, is a different part of the conversation. That idea of unearned is part of the society is structured in a way, so you're born into that structure. And it's not by choice that you have that privilege or not. You are privileged by the society, but usually that is not something that people celebrate. It's usually pointing to that there are oppressions, right, different social oppressions in society, and your position in that sort of structure is one where you receive privileges regardless of you can't refuse them or anything. It's just by nature of the way you are situated and understood in the larger social context and the way that's already organized around you.
Thank you so much for those thoughtful answers. We actually had a question that came in very focused on faculty members, and I was hoping that Dr. Agosto could attend to it. The question is, what advice would you give to faculty members, especially to faculty members from a privileged majority group, to promote diversity and diversity of perspectives in the classroom and academia in general?
Well, first, I think this is not work that people do alone. I think this is work that people do in relationship with others. So I would encourage them to participate with others, maybe on campus or off campus. Some colleges have diversity committees where faculty work together to work through whatever their issues are for faculty pertinent to whatever they're studying, teaching or researching. So that's one thing. The Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Equal Opportunity, I might have jumbled that up a bit, but they have like trainings for faculty, especially when it comes to hiring. So they know the research, they know some things to watch out for. So if you attend those sessions, then when you're on a hiring committee and we're looking for new faculty, then they can understand, so what are they doing in that moment, or what are other people doing on that committee that feeds into this pattern of being exclusive in terms of rejecting groups of people, but not with this sort of even acknowledgement that you are reproducing these oppressive sort of practices. And so I've seen that play out as well, where people weren't intending to do harm, but they were like privileging certain groups or finding, for instance, thinking men have potential and thinking about them not just in terms of what their application says that they've done, but seeing potential. They are probably able to do something, but not usually saying that about women, not seeing potential in women. So that kind, we talked about bias, right? The biases that come out in the hiring process. So taking advantage of those things that are there, that other faculty are working on, services that are being offered, like Safe Zone training, for instance, they offer that to faculty, to programs. And working with other people who are going to be like critical friends, right, to help you. So faculty, adults, teachers, administrators, on and on. I can't think of any group that is impervious to this, right, who would not benefit from having critical friends to push them in these conversations.
And we actually have a question for you now, Jerry, specifically about the undocumented student experience. Okay. And that is, what steps does USF take to educate and protect undocumented students once their legal protection expires?
So I think that's a really, really complicated question. There are a lot of nuances in terms of state legislator, USF as a whole, and so I can speak to a couple of things that I think will address some of the educational pieces as well as the community support. The first one is the thing that we offer from our office, out of the Office of Multicultural Affairs, is Undocumented, which is a training. It's a 3-hour training dedicated to educating folks on the lived experiences of our undocumented students, and so what it means to come to college and really work hard or fight to come to college and have that experience, or what does the home life experience look like for undocumented students, and what are the challenges and successes there as well. And so we have a part of that training that focuses on the lived experiences part. We have a part of the training that talks about the legislation, so House Bill 851 and what that impact has on our institution, as well as some of the other legislation as well, and some ways to connect on campus. And so the educational part to the question is, again, another shameless plug, is Undocumented, as that's a really great resource that we as an institution have created in order to educate folks on that policy. In terms of supporting students from the other levels of community, there's a group called Undocumented, which is formed by students who are here, who may be undocumented or have family members who are undocumented, and so they find community there as well. And so students themselves can connect with other students who understand the topics more. And then what's really great too is at an institution we have what we call our Undocumented symbol. So there are staff and faculty members who have gone through our training and are certified as allies for undocumented students. And so there are multiple people across campus, so you can check them out. We have a list on our website of all faculty or staff members here on campus who have completed the Undocumented training, and they'll have an Undocumented symbol on their door, their office, or somewhere on display for you to be able to ask them questions. It looks just like a little green butterfly here on campus. So yeah.
Thank you. Something I want to ask about is if a student wanted to learn more about the concepts of privilege and oppression, what are some steps that they could take to educate themselves? For example, maybe some programs that the Office of Multicultural Affairs offers, or maybe some readings that have come up and informed your practice as a faculty member. Jerry, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can talk through some of the programmatic things that we do. So I definitely want to encourage folks to attend the Intercultural Student Leadership Conference, which is a day-long personal and professional development conference. And so we talk about things about social justice and power and privilege, and we really dive down into some of the nitty-gritty of it all. So the intersections of LGBTQ plus identities and maybe being an international student, or talking about how there is Black male development, what that experience is like here in the 21st century. And so the conference itself is a really great opportunity for students to explore concepts around diversity and inclusion, as well as help to connect them to the resources on campus to be engaged and more active more. We also have several programs, one throughout the year as well, called Intersectionality, where it's a series of discussions that we offer in our office to talk about identity, to talk about power, privilege, and oppression, et cetera. And so definitely look out for those two experiences from our office. Yeah.
I think there are things that students have done to help create diversity among faculty and sort of push that. So having an active voice on campus and to sort of initiate some of the conversations. So if they're in classes, they can do so raising questions about power and privilege and oppression within their coursework. And I think some students find that harder to do in some areas, like I hear math or engineering. But I think it applies, especially if you think about what the different fields are. So if they're asking, what does the field look like? What's the diversity of the field? That might be a way for them to open up the conversation. But there are, sort of seminal work, seminal readings that people, I mentioned one earlier about the 5 Faces of Oppression by Iris Marion Young. A lot of people still use work like Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Knapsack of Privilege. So that's still sort of a seminal piece. But I think nothing substitutes for the conversations that you can have with other students. So I would say not to be sort of fearful if you think that someone is a bit more developed in their capacity to have these difficult conversations, that don't be afraid that they're so far beyond, right, where you are. That would be sort of, you should invite yourself into that to learn from that person. So I think those are some tangible things that people can do, and because it's also considered a R1, a research intensive university, you go to the research, right? So whatever your field is, you can ask what is oppression, diversity, inclusion, and some of the other terms, right? How does unconscious bias work in the field? What do researchers know about? What have they studied with regards to these sorts of questions in the field?
it's really awesome that you bring back Marion Young's 5 Phases of Oppression, because we actually have a comment that really says that they're thrilled that you were talking about that, because it must be either a previous staff member or a previous student who's participated in some of residential education programs, because that's a framework that we use when we facilitate some of our programs. And the question is actually, what is residential education doing to like put out those programmatic pieces? And I wanted to highlight that in the fall we do Choose a Better Word, which is a campaign based around acknowledging the violence that certain language can have against other people, and like that the words that you choose to use on people have an effect on them. And then in the spring, we host the Tunnel of Oppression, which is a event that helps students walk through a learning experience that engages them in these terms and vocabulary that boosts their knowledge about these about these terms and these subjects, which is a really powerful student experience that is open to all students, but very easy for residential students on our campus to experience because it's happening right in their back door. So with that being said, we're going to take our final commercial break, and we want you to stay right here because we'll be back with more Real Talk Live right after this.
Welcome home to Juniper Hall and Poplar Hall. Located on South Campus, Juniper Poplar, or JPH, is a beautiful residential community that includes various nearby amenities such as a 24-hour desk, a mailroom, a dining hall, and the Magnolia swimming pool. Both Juniper and Poplar offer suite-style rooms. Each suite consists of 2 double occupancy rooms that share a bathroom that is cleaned weekly, toilet paper included. If you need more space, our facilities team can raise the beds to 5 feet high so you can put your desk and dresser underneath. When you move in, just ask your resident assistant to help make this happen. The campus residential experience is all about fostering community and supporting student success. Residents in Juniper and Poplar find it easy to connect with peers in the pod spaces on every wing. In the pod, residents can collaborate on their homework assignments, catch the latest episode of their favorite shows, or perhaps just relax in between classes. Ready for a bite? Take advantage of the full kitchen that includes plenty of counter space for preparing all of your favorite home recipes. When it's time to do your laundry, use your USF ID to pay with Bullbucks in the facilities on the first floor. Get ready to live the Bulls life.
Welcome home to Beta and Castor Hall, located in the heart of North Campus. Live the Bulls life in a traditional style room in an environment best suited to helping you connect with others. Most residents will have a roommate, but some single rooms are available. Embrace the roommate experience and support one another as you enjoy everything USF has to offer. Each room is in close proximity to a community bathroom that is cleaned daily. The campus residential experience is all about fostering community and supporting student success. Each wing features a common area with furniture and a television. Check out the multiple kitchen areas and perhaps cook up something to share with your neighbors. If you don't feel like cooking, make your way to one of the campus dining halls nearby. Bring a friend and enjoy the wide variety of dining options that cater to all dietary needs. When it's time to do your laundry, just bring quarters or use your USF ID to pay with Bullbucks in the facility on the first floor. If you're looking for something to do while the wash runs, invite your neighbors to a friendly game of volleyball or basketball at the courts right outside. If you're looking to kick back and enjoy the beautiful Florida weather, grab your sunscreen and relax in the hammocks on beautiful Castor Beach. Learn more on our website and get ready to live the Bulls life.
Welcome back to Real Talk Live. I'm your host, Zach Hyder, joined by Jerry Staples and Dr. Agosto. Our past conversation touched on how power shows up as bias. And something that I've noticed in many of my conversations regarding this topic we've discussed tonight is also a subject known as social justice. And as we move forward in this conversation, I was hoping that we could unpack this term and define it a little bit more. Dr. Agosto, would you start us off?
Sure. So I think if we take a part first, take the social part, then we can understand that to be talking about social groups, social experiences, so people, and people making up groups of people. So the social part versus the justice part. So the justice part, there are different ways that people think about what it means to be just. An equivalent for many people is this idea of fairness. So what is fair? And not everyone agrees, right, or has the same set of criteria for determining what is fair or just. And that's where it becomes very sort of sticky, where people start to disagree. So if you put it together, in essence, we're talking about social justice. We're talking about issues of fairness and equity for different groups of people. Now, some people talk about economic justice, and that's their focus on, right, economic issues. And some people say economic justice is a part of social justice, and they fold that in. Or people will talk about environmental justice. And then some people will just focus more on the environment, but other people will put that under social justice and say, even though we're talking about the environment, we're still talking about what that means for different groups of people. So social justice, when I think about it as a moving target. It's not something that we know what it is and this is what it looks like all the time and forever. And it hasn't always been like what we think is fair today hasn't always been what we thought as a society was fair in the past. So different societies, and over time that might change. So I think it's a moving target. So we always have to have conversations and figure out what it is that we want as a society, where are we going, who are we trying to create, you know, in this society, and what do we want it to be into the future. And so we have those difficult conversations. So I think when people hear the term, sometimes they react to the term because they think it's indoctrination. There's an idea of justice, and this is what it looks like for everyone, so everybody needs to conform, and it's my definition. It's my way or the highway. And that's not usually the way I've seen people go about social justice. I've seen it be more open, where people are deliberating. But then people usually at some point take a stance to say, in this moment in time, based on this set of value systems in this society, these are things that we can now agree to, that these things are important and these things are sort of restricted or prohibited or not allowed. They're not conducive to the kinds of society and the direction we see ourselves moving. And by no means do I want to infer that, or that is imply that that's universal, and everyone in a society agrees to that, right? So there's diverse opinions, but I think it's for people to work out what that means, but still be able to say, you know, here's my ethical stance, this is what I think is fair at the moment, and this is what I'm going to do or not do. And then you still have to, there's that responsibility, then taking responsibility for that decision in conversation with other people, and then looking at the impact. So you think that's just, and it sounds all well and good and fair to people, but earlier when I talked about the outcomes, the impact, but 2 years later, a year later, we're seeing how is this affecting people now. So yeah, it's not something you can always like predict and say with certainty that this is the way it is and this is only going to bring good outcomes for everyone forever. But is it better than what we have now? One of the ways that I think about it when people say like, well, what does that look like? You know, I think for me, I think we're getting closer to social justice as a society when what we see now, sort of these patterns of oppressions that are consistent over time, like women are, you know, not as prevalent in this field, right? Or this group of people doesn't do that, they don't excel in this way. When we look at prison industrial complex, right, who's in jails, in all these sort of areas of what we think a good life is, we see certain groups not at the top, right? And so once that becomes more erratic and not a pattern, then I think it's more just. I don't think it's getting rid of everything, like no one's going to be in poverty, but I don't think we will see this consistency that we've been seeing over time, decades, even into centuries for some groups.
I was just going to add that I think the our world is fluid. Like, we don't live in a vacuum, we don't live in an isolated kind of experience. And so we have to be able to see social justice as a fluid response to our society as well. I think that's a really important part that Dr. Agosto was saying, is that you don't suddenly one day become like pinnacle of social justice or the pinnacle of allyship. Like, it's something that you grow into and you learn from and you continue to move with. When I think about, educational justice, right? 40 years ago, having access to a laptop or to a computer wasn't something that we talked about. But we're talking about today, where a lot of people have iPhones, or there are a good number of people that have access to the internet and technology. Not everyone does. And so as we're creating educational processes, how do we structure our lives so that people who may not have readily accessible access to technology can now engage in meaningful, successful ways in our classroom spaces or in our educational learning spaces? And so that's a fluid thing that we adjusted as a society. We as a society came together and realized that in some places, this time in our lives, technology is very prevalent, and so we need to make that adjustment there. And so having that fluidity and allowing yourself to grow and change and allowing yourself to move is the real key part about social justice too.
Thank you for that. And now that we have this working definition for tonight and in the moment, Jerry, I specifically want to ask you, how do you see that definition line up with conceptions of what that phrase means on campus here at USF?
So again, I think it's all about that fluidity and that growth. College is an opportunity to explore, to challenge your worldviews, to gain new worldviews. And so for me, again, having that fluidity, learning more of identities outside yourself. And so again, if you don't identify within the LGBTQ plus community, but you want to learn more about that, what are the things that you do intentional in order to gain that information, to gain that better understanding in your world? And so that way you can be more social justice minded, you can be more of an ally. And so for me, it's really not being afraid, right? And so, well, you can be afraid. It's understandable that sometimes these conversations can be difficult and hard. And so there is a level of anxiety that is natural that comes, but being able to move through that anxiety and acknowledge it and claim it and say, okay, I might be anxious, I might be nervous about talking about race or talking about gender, but it's something I need to learn and grow in. And so having that skill set, learning that skill set early on will really help make students be successful in this global, diverse society that we live in.
Thank you. And Dr. Agosto, as someone that teaches about social justice, what are some common misconceptions that you think exist about this term when people are first learning about it?
I think I mentioned one earlier, perhaps, the idea that oppression is like depression, and that people feel badly in sort of an emotional way, and that they carry around every day like, oh, I'm oppressed, I feel so badly, when that may not be the case. So it's not necessarily how people feel, but it's how people are positioned within the society to have different access, right? To not be sort of, to have the freedom to be able to make decisions and sort of determine aspects of their lives. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. I think another thing we talked about was privilege. So a misconception that, privilege is something that you can sort of give up. It's sort of yours to define or reject or accept. So I think we've talked about it in a way sort of to get people beyond that. I think another one that we haven't really talked about, but I think is really important here, is this idea of sort of critical orientation. And I think that's a misconception too. If I say critical and people think it's only critical thinking. And so for some people, critical thinking is only that you can use logic and reasoning, right? You use rhetorical devices to make your point, right? Argumentation. And that's not all that it is. I think that's a part of participating in a social justice dialogue, but that's not all of it. What I mean by critical is the critique of power and the critique of domination. And so having that critical attitude is something I think that goes along with a lot of what we're talking about. So even if we have events like Tunnel of Oppression, we may also be critical of them. We may say that this is a great thing for what it tries to do to educate, but what is it missing? What does it create? What kinds of understandings does that activity create that might be misleading, that might be problematic? How might we need to then debrief students, right, to say, you should also take this away from this activity. So a lot of people will do sort of like simulations, like to try to understand what is it like to be disabled. Let's put you in a wheelchair for an hour and to give you that experience, right? And that for some people is a simulation, so they need to understand that that's a simulation of experience. That is not what it means, or the full experience of being disabled. So you can just end it and walk away from it is not usually what we're talking about when we're talking about oppression. It's not something you have the ability as an individual to say, this is not going to be, my position within this structure going forward. So I think that critical attitude, and it deals with critical thinking, but it's not just critical thinking, it's also the critique of domination.
Thank you both for those thoughtful responses. As we begin to wrap up tonight, I wanted to ask if there are any closing remarks that you have or reflections about what you've shared tonight.
I think for me, it's just embracing the dissonance, embracing the discomfort. There's a lot of work when we talk about diversity, about the anxiety that people face, and they really equate it to the fight or flight syndrome that folks experience when something scary or something uncomfortable shows up for them. And so recognizing that, okay, sometimes talking about diversity might be uncomfortable, and knowing that it's an okay thing, and knowing that you have a community here, there are faculty, there are staff, there are even your peers who are willing to help guide you along the conversation. So you don't have to know everything your first day here at USF. You don't have to know everything your last day either, but just being okay with embracing the unknown and embracing the dissonance, and knowing that you have a community here to help you figure it all out.
How about you, Dr. Agosto?
Yeah, I'd say sort of along those lines, being comfortable where you are. That you may be with other people who are more comfortable with the discussion. But that's where they are, and so you shouldn't judge yourself against someone else who has had much more time to think about these topics, and be okay with failure, to fail at times, right? I said something to someone that seemed really insensitive when I said it, and I felt like it damaged our relationship. But it came out, and that's what I said, and I had to try to recover from that. And I never felt that I fully recovered from that, but I did learn a lesson from it. But I think that doesn't stop me, and it didn't stop me. So I have to keep on being able to have the conversation and take the risk that you may offend someone, you may say the wrong word, you may, whatever it is, right? You're still learning. And I think that learning attitude is very appropriate for students on the university campus.
I mean, if I just may add, I think what you said about time is really the powerful key here. It's like, it's a journey, right? Full of highs, full of lows, full of wins, and full of losses. And so being okay with that, it's a journey, and being open to letting every experience that we have around diversity teach you, even if it's a good one and it's exciting, you have fun. Even for some that it might be more challenging, you might have had a misstep, or you might have said something insensitive by accident. But just know that it's okay that you have those highs and those lows, because it's a journey. And again, it's not a destination. We're not trying to be the social justice being of all things. We're trying to just be a just and fair society, and that takes a process and it takes time.
Thank you both for those closing remarks. I want to thank you one more time. I want to highlight that Jerry Staples and Dr. Vonzell Agosto have joined us this evening. To our viewers, thank you for watching Real Talk Live. If you're on campus at a watch party with your resident assistant, be sure to hang tight and fill out the Summer Residventure Attendance Survey so you can have a chance to earn our prize. I'm Zach Hyder, and thanks for learning with us tonight. Some comments from our live audience.